Hololive Generation 1 was Hololive's first serious foray into VTubing, their first attempt of taking a step into the industry. Tokinosora was not but a test subject, a mascot to represent their products, but aside from Roboko and Miko, the first gen was to be her colleagues and companions into this new and emerging industry. Their members were Yuzura Mel, Natsuhiro Matsuri, Akiro Senfao, Akai Hato, and Shirakami Fubuki. People know these VTubers, they are big names in the industry, but there was one other person that people refused to mention. Hell, some people may not know her at all, and some may have heard of her but only heard vague things about what had happened and not really bothering to dig deeper into the history of it all. How could they, after all? No one had a complete account of what had truly happened. That person was Hitomi Chris. Some people may be wondering, why have few people only heard of this woman before? Or if you have heard of her, why is it that people treat her like Voldemort, as the person that must not be named or discussed? Why is it that those that had first-hand accounts and archives of the entire situation had their posts removed or voluntarily closed down? Everything about her termination was wiped. The details are all sourced from gossip sites and drama channels, and with some not exactly having what many would consider solid evidence. And while it caused a bit of a stir back then and had some archiving attempts, very few of the attempts with receipts of what had happened remained. Well, some videos got taken down by CoverCorp themselves, so that doesn't bode well for this video. Yet, even with all accounts and infos of her termination taken down, people still cannot help but whisper about her. For how can they not? It's one of the only 2 instances of official terminations that Hololive executed, and no one knows exactly how it happened other than those involved and those who witnessed it firsthand. And it's curious to know what could have happened to Hitomi Chris if she carried on until the VTuber boom. She could have had a good professional streaming career under Hololive. She could have been an idol just like everyone else. So this is the story of Hitomi Chris's termination. It was only Tokinosora and Roboko that Hololive had when they first launched their first generation. Hololive barely had anyone to properly look after the VTubers they hired. There was no work culture. There was no sense of community. And when Hololive announced their first full-blown generation, those 6 members were supposed to bring about that first step of being a proper VTuber agency. And Hitomi Chris was set to debut on the 3rd of June 2018. She made her first stream during this time and then nothing after that. Other members made their debuts, but she was silent. And come the 25th of that same month, CoverCorp suddenly issued a temporary suspension announcement. But on the very next day, that temporary suspension became a full-blown termination, clarifying that they were not involved with any of the parties that were part of the drama. Hell, even the artist of her character design got terminated. Any and all information about Hitomi Chris was removed from Hololive's website, her social media accounts were privated, and her channel was nuked. She was not missed. Barely anyone grieved her, including the girls at the time, because at that point they were still strangers to each other. Everybody moved on, and aside from drama consumers, everybody didn't care. But let's take a step back and rewind for a bit. How did this happen? Where did this start? Well, let me introduce you to the secondary character of our story. Let's call him M. I gave him a moniker and censored his username because I don't trust VTuber fans to be civil about anything and not harass him. Please do not harass him. In any case, everything that happens in this story revolves around and because of this man, because it was his little expose that sparked this little drama, with an entire series of tweets exposing his affairs with Hitomi Chris. We'll see these statements as we go along the video, but this is how the story went. Hitomi Chris met M one day who was interested in the same things as he was, and when she was interested in joining Hololive, she asked him for help to get into the company. He was, essentially, a third person who could help her chances of getting in. And contrary to popular belief, it's important to note that this was not part of Hololive's staff at all, just like this screenshot explicitly states and just like what CoverCorp announced. In any case, this man promised to give Hitomi Chris monetary and tech support to help her pass the audition, giving her an advantage over other competitors in the scene. But in return, Hitomi Chris would have to be in a relationship with him, and she obliged, giving the man everything he wanted: dates, sexual acts, romantic messages, everything. And as M and Chris carried on with their transactional relationship, Hitomi Chris finally got into Hololive and passed the audition, with the two even celebrating the event. With everything going on, the relationship seemed mutually beneficial at first. It wasn't exactly predatory, it was transactional, and no one was getting hurt. Until, according to Makoto, on Tweetcast, Hitomi Chris mentioned the compensation dating to her fanbase, saying she didn't want to continue it anymore and explicitly mentioning that what was happening to her was and angered by this, M confronted her and Chris confronted him back. She didn't want this relationship anymore, she wanted to cut all ties, and she ran off with the expensive equipment M gave her. She even threatened to get the authorities involved if he tried to contact her again, and further angered by this, M let loose to the public their private affairs. In a now deleted series of tweets, M hard doxed her, dropping personal information like her full name and even the school she apparently went to. I say apparently because even M wasn't sure if the school Chris told him was the actual school she went to. Because after this whole ordeal happened, the school that was mentioned posted a note saying that such a name and girl was not a member of their school. He also dropped her audition tape and posted their chat logs detailing the conversation and how everything went. And to summarize, M was very angry when Chris pushed him back and threatened him with the authorities, and he was made even angrier at the fact that Chris stole from him. All the equipment and hardware that he had given her, that was part of their deal. It would have been fine if she just returned that because he spent around 200,000 yen for those and it was all just going to disappear because she said so. Hell, he even considered filing a suit against her if she wasn't going to return the equipment. Only after did M drop his tweets did Hitomi decide to return his stuff. That yes, she'll return or reimburse the equipment that he paid for via her attorney only after M deleted the tweets. And delete them, he did. After that, things ended. Chris finally broke free from that relationship and M got reimbursed, deleting all the incriminating evidence of what they did together, which is part of the reason why first-hand receipts of what had happened were difficult to find. Now, the story doesn't end here, because there's a few extra details about this story that I think are worth noting. According to the archived Twitter thread that M posted some time back, it seemed like M and Hitomi weren't as hostile to each other by the end of the whole ordeal as many people would like to think. Because as they were talking with their lawyer, M still offered to keep some sort of deal with Hitomi. Hitomi even said that if the deal had no benefit to her, she'd actually get the police involved still. M, as an example, offered to buy her a gaming rig, and in exchange, he wanted special treatment from her, to get calls as she plays, especially goodnight calls, and surprisingly, Hitomi even considered it, stating that she might do the whole calling him while playing part but that goodnight calls were a no-go. This tells me that they were not so hostile toward each other by the end of everything. They were not friends, but they didn't hate each other by the looks of it. Hell, they even had some degree of willingness to continue working together. She did not seem that upset about actually being doxxed, probably because such a thing for one is kind of normal in Japan when it comes to idols, and that she may have lied to him about her personal information in case something like this happened. So, by the looks of things, this guy was overly attached or even obsessed with Chris. I'm not trying to defend him here, but it doesn't seem like he came to Chris with the sole malicious intent of violating her like what many people claim he did. He seemed like he genuinely got attached to her and wanted to do everything he can to maintain this relationship with Chris. And one of those things just happened to include dropping her real name in the school she went to, so I don't know, maybe he wasn't that genuine after all, or perhaps he was just desperate to get his money back. However, Chris even said she willingly took the deal because it was the fastest way for her to get her own character on the web. Again, according to M, it was Chris that approached him and asked for everything. It was supposed to be just purely a transactional relationship. When M publicized the whole thing and made his expose, most people actually sided with M at first. It's unsure if people sided with him because they missed the part where Hitomi was great, or if people did this despite Hitomi claiming the harassment, probably thinking that it was par for the course in their transaction. M also exposed her for underage drinking, which also fueled that contempt a bit. To many of the Japanese that knew of the initial story, both people were the bad guys but leaned closer to Hitomi as the worst one, for stealing 200,000 yen's worth of property, for breaking the terms of their deal, for complaining about the terms despite already agreeing to them. However, as time passed and more people pondered and heard the rumors, they started to side with Hitomi, especially the English fans, because Hitomi didn't know the true extent of what she was signing up for. She was a minor who had big goals and thought she knew what she was getting into, but once she realized that there were some lines she couldn't cross, she wanted to turn back. She underestimated the price of going this route, and that's a mistake any ambitious young person can make. The fanbase in this side of the world has labeled M a predator and a douchebag. But perhaps one factor as to why people sided with M at the time was the fact that, After Hitomi Chris lost her platform and got terminated, there was no way for her to speak her side to its fullest extent. Even right now, we can only fall back and take M's words on the whole situation, no matter how dubious it may be, since he was the only one that actually spoke about it at that time. One should just be aware that he might or might not have spun the narrative to paint himself as the victim, and we don't really have an opposing account from Hitomi to challenge that. So again, at the end of everything, Hitomi was fired, and with Cover Corp washing their hands off of the whole fiasco. At the time, Hitomi probably never thought Cover would grow this big. At the time, she probably didn't realize the true extent of the consequences of this drama, thinking that Hololive was just one failed attempt at a professional online career out of the many that she wanted to take. And that's pretty sad. People look at the situation more so to ponder about what could have been if she was still here. In fact, her story only picked up some steam after Aloe's graduation and Rusha's termination, especially since Hitomi and Rusha were the only instances of terminations we've seen in Hololive. Hitomi's activity and influence weren't great enough to be noted, unlike Aloe, who had a great kinship with her genmates and had shown great potential to the public. As such, no one mourned Chris. Right now, where she is, only God and a few people know. Perhaps her resurface on the internet isn't as significant enough for many people to notice, or perhaps the language barrier just makes it hard for me to find her. She may even feel bitter, sad, or angry when Hololive eventually got popular. It was a future taken from her, and it's a bit depressing to think about. As for M, well, M tried to do something similar again with other VTubers and even wears his deeds on his Twitter account. He even publicly tried to recruit people back then and had successfully done so. Remember the screenshots I provided where he said he wanted to make a private VTuber business? That was perhaps supposed to be the Makotan faction, but I don't exactly know what it is specifically. But as we can observe, that project didn't really take off too well. There was word among the community that he got arrested, but unfortunately I didn't find any evidence of that. The only unusual activity that I discovered was that there was a massive gap of inactivity on his Twitter from 2018 to 2020, which could imply something might have happened in 2019, or that he probably deleted any tweets he made during this year. Look, I don't know enough Japanese to dumpster dive the validity of his arrest. Not that it matters if it's true though, because he's a free man now who is quite active on Twitter, and from the looks of it, he doesn't seem remorseful. And the rest of the community? Well, to us, Hitomi is something of a ghost story. A tale about the horrors going on behind the scenes of the industry. Even if Hitomi didn't know the absolute tragedy of her termination at that time, those of us in the future look back and realize how absolutely tragic it is. It is a story about the depraved things people will do to get what they want, only to realize the true price they have to pay. A story about the exploitations of those more powerful and more influential than you. A story that perhaps isn't too uncommon, even among the biggest names of the entertainment world.